Welcome to House Calls for our June show, and I always have a theme for every month, and usually, traditionally, June is the month of grads and dads. And probably for some of us, we're sort of glad we're not working at our old jobs. So let me start off with kudos, congratulations to all those graduates who are listening in today. Go get a job, make some money, pay your taxes. For birthdays, happy birthday to the following people. I know they listen in. Chrissy Barth, who's been on our show before talking about taking care of athletes. Beverly Gordon, who is a member of our family, so to speak, at my medical practice. Robert Bunn, Bob Pato, Kim Schaller, Barb Kaplan, who's a local designer and a widow, who's been on two of my shows, not only on House Calls, but on Widow's Walk with a great review of people. Dr. John Bishai, excellent cardiologist. My grandson, Henry, turned 2 this month. Happy birthday, Henry. Danny Williams, Connie Mickelson, Rebecca Rosen, Adelaida Velasco Severson is having her birthday this month. Marianne McLean, Lori Batchelder, Tony Lacombe, Dr. Jimmy Llanas, wonderful dermatologist from Mayo. Husband and wife team, Tracy and Jeff Goebel, share a birthday but on different years. Happy birthday, my friends, Dr. Deborah Rochelle, acupuncturist friend, Amy Catton, who does the best phlebotomy I know of, John Olson, who's celebrating in Oregon, Dimitri Haniotis, dear friend of the family, and my cousin Gina, up Northern California. So happy birthday, all of you. I really think every birthday is a gift. Celebrate it, be grateful for it. June is the month of brides, so happy anniversary to Deb Beatty and her husband Rick, celebrating their 3rd anniversary. They were on my Widow's Walk about widows and widowers remarrying. Dr. Julian A. and Dr. Jeffrey Zeig, they're outstanding psychologists who travel internationally about emotional trauma, family of origin trauma. I had the great honor of presiding at 3 of their wedding events. 2 of the formal ones here in Arizona, the formal legal one in Arizona, and the 3rd one was in Sorrento, Italy, 2 years ago on the summer solstice. Dr. Kirsten Painter and husband Daniel also celebrating 3 years, and they live in Bratislava, Slovakia. I got the chance to visit them last year. It was a great visit. This month, we also celebrated Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to the dads, the granddads, the stepdads out there. Also, June 23rd was the International Widows Day, and it falls on the heels of after completing the 4-day Widows Wellness Retreat at Canyon Ranch. It was the 2nd year I was the main speaker at this event. We had 6 widows from all over the country. 2 of the widows were regular listeners to my Widow's Walk show that I had on Voice America. So it was a very moving event, and we might, during the course of this year, have a short segment on follow-up on some of the widows as they undergo their recovery. So amazing women, strong women who go through horrible loss, rebuild their lives, and find their new path and really their new identity. So typically for our June show, I dedicate this to dads. I interview different dads about their lessons in life, what's important to them. And I think of fathers, I think of my parents, my mom and dad who are now in heaven. But particularly dads, what do I learn from dad? What is the traditional father figure? We think of fatherly strengths. We think of the guy who makes the rules of the house, the, quote, head of the household. He lays down the rules. He's the one in my family growing up. He was a disciplinarian. The old thing growing up is, you do something naughty, you wait till your father comes home. He's the one who disciplines you. Our mothers, traditionally we think of them as teaching us how to be loving and kind, but usually from dad, that father figure, it's do what's right, do the right thing. Don't disappoint me, do the right thing. And be responsible, right? Be strong. And so I hearken back to our parents at times of stress and times of challenge in our lives. What do they teach me? But most important, what do they teach me about my moral compass? What do they teach me about right and wrong and doing the right thing? And that's a challenge because sometimes a lot of people get lost on that path of what is right, what is wrong, or even if they care anymore about what is right or wrong. So this show, in a lot of ways, is about doing the right thing in a tough situation. And how did this come to be? Well, if you're in the U.S. like we are, the last 3 or 4 months actually have been an interesting time in history. Actually, the last 4 years have been an interesting time in history. And there's a lot of things in the media. And I always think everything you see, hear, and believe is through the filter of the media, through a lens. And the question is, who controls that lens and how much credence you give to it? And we are really controlled by the media. Everything you believe in. How did you know this? Why do you believe this? Well, I saw it on Instagram, TikTok. This is, very few people will sit down, go through a book, a scholarly piece of work, read it, and think about it. And what is the value of doing that? The value is you get to think about it, you reflect, you make an educated decision instead of a reaction. And I think our world now is there's a lot of reaction. How can we focus on more rationality, thinking about it through, without reacting and without going anywhere in terms of being polarized and being emotional about it? And a lot of the hype that I see in the media is so emotionally driven. There's a lot of emotion, of anger, frustration, people yelling. And I always say, the truth does not shout. The truth doesn't shout or shout you down. And when people say, well, so-and-so is yelling at me because they disagree with what I believe, I said, whisper to them, lower your voice, and be calm. Because then you're coming from a place of peace and truth versus anger and suppression. So I would just play with those thoughts. So as we talk about the past few months, a lot of the media hype has been about a book, finally, we know, because this was going to come out, a New York Times bestseller. How do you become a New York Times bestseller? My publishers tell me in order for my book to be a New York Times bestseller, I have to sell 10,000 books in 1 week. And then from there, the author gets money, they get royalty, they get famous, because that's what everybody wants, to be famous. But you don't want to be infamous, do you? Because there's a fine line between famous and infamous. And you don't want to be infamous. You want to be famous in a good way and then get you off the front page. So that bestseller was written by reporter Jake Tapper, who entitled his book Original Sin. And on the cover, he writes, Original Sin, the tagline, President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and the disastrous choice to run again. If I were advising him on what to write, I wouldn't put Original Sin. I would entitle that book Send in the Clowns. Because where did that song come from? It was a beautiful Judy Collins song back in the 60s. But Send in the Clowns came from the phrase they use in a circus when somebody falls off the tightrope and crashes and there's an accident. To divert the audience, they send in the clowns. So this is what happens. They're sending in the clown. So number one, I wanted to know that I did not read the book. I did not endorse it. I don't know Jake Tapper. I don't think he's ever interviewed me. I don't think I've ever worked with him at the White House. Second, as I said, I would have named it Send in the Clowns. Third is Jake writes about what most Americans have suspected during the entire Biden presidency. They couldn't help but think there's something wrong with this guy's mannerisms, his behavior, his speech, his gaffes, falling down, all those. There's something not quite right. But the media was there. I used to work with the press pool. We traveled. They're always there. But they saw it, but they didn't report it, but they wrote about it to make money after the fact. That doesn't strike me as something quite right. Does that for you? Does that make sense that you're actually seeing like an accident happen, but you don't say anything, but you'll write about it after the victims are, buried. I'm just going to write about it and make some money too, and interview about it. So I just wonder, are there ethics among reporters? I mean, where's the ethics of that, right? So it's very sad. It's disappointing. And again, the audience, reader, beware. Let the reader beware. So today's topic is something I hold near and dear because it was a past life of mine, is presidential health, presidential disability, and the role of the White House doctor and the media. And just my background, for those who don't know me, I had the honor of serving as White House doctor for 9 years. I was a Navy doctor for 24 years. Actually, it was 24 years ago. I retired in 2001 from the Navy, served 24 years active duty. The last 9 years, I was White House doctor. I came in to the White House in 1992 as the Navy physician to George Herbert Walker Bush. I was there his last year of presidency. I was his Navy doctor, took care of the Bush family, and that he lost the election to President Bill Clinton. That's typically a 2-year assignment for us Navy docs, but at the 2-year mark at the White House, President Clinton wanted me to stay on board and promoted me to be the director of the White House Medical Unit, and I ultimately became physician to the President of the United States. So there's a lot of titles going around. So at the White House, they have a team of medical professionals called the White House Medical Unit. Traditionally, it's been run by the military because it's a lot easier to hire those docs. They're paid by the military, by the government. They wear a uniform. If they mess up, you can court-martial them. They listen to orders. They don't work. They have a salary by the government, by the military, and they all have top secret security clearances. And they're good doctors, very good doctors. You're selected by the military of your Army, Navy, Air Force. They select you by nomination, then you get a top secret security clearance, then you get an interview at the White House, and if the director of the White House Medical Unit, physician to the president, the whole team says you're on board, they give you an assignment. You're assigned at the White House for 2 to 3 years, unless somebody like me or some of my successors, they ask you to stay for 4 years, 8 years, 9 years. And you serve at the pleasure of the president if you're that close to the president. So titles. White House doctor is a term that we use for the physician who was nominated to the White House on assignment by the military. You have a White House doctor. We have lots of White House doctors, Army, Navy, Air Force doctors who are assigned that title. You get a special presidential support badge. It's a wonderful time. You get close to the president, but there's a separate doctor in the House, okay? That is the physician to the President of the United States. That is a political appointment. It is a political appointment. You have a fancy certificate. I have it hanging in my office. It gives you the political title of physician to the president. That is the equivalent of chief of staff or assistant chief of staff. That is considered senior staff. When you do a trip overseas on Air Force One and you're part of that diplomatic group arriving with the president, physician to the president has the title, the Honorable. They call you the Honorable Dr. Connie Mariano, Rear Admiral, physician to the president. That has standing because you're chosen by the president, your name as that person. And you've got the certificate, and there's a very small club. There's a very small group of physicians to the president. I Googled on board how many predecessors. I was the only military physician to the president under Bill Clinton. There was one other woman physician to the president, and that was Dr. Janet Travell, who was a physiatrist under Kennedy. She was co-physician to the president with Dr. George, is it Burkett? Berkeley, Dr. George Berkeley, back in the 60s. But the working definition of physician to the president really is this: who's the president's doctor? And then, well, how do you know? It's the person that the media goes after if something goes wrong. Then you know who the president's doctor is. So the president's doctor, who I've never met personally, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, has now been subpoenaed to appear on July 9th in front of a committee to testify about what he knew about the president's mental decline. We don't envy him. None of us do. Nobody ever wanted for any of that to happen. So somebody who sat in his chair for 9 years, served at the White House. So I want to give a little bit of my perspective before I move to our illustrious guest, who knows the history of all the other White House doctors. It is a very lonely position because on your shoulders, something goes wrong, your patient dies in office, you better beware because they're all going to ask you, what did you miss? What happened? And then I think the ultimate nightmare is if he has a progressive disease and you're in a position where you love and care about your patient, his family, because it's a very unusual position. How many doctors see your patient every day? Imagine your doctor goes home to your house, follows you around on every trip you go on, is in your car, on your elevator. If you're at a hotel, they're 2 doors down. You see them every single day. That's your doctor. And if you're sick, they come to you. They know your family. They're like a member of the family, right? The Secret Service guys who I love, they always look at the doctor as being in the secure package. And a lot of times you feel insecure in the secure package because we also call it the kill zone. Something bad happens, they want to kill the president. Doc, if you're there right behind him, you can't save him if you're dead. I always tell the docs, get out of the kill zone. So it is a very lonely position because you want to make sure your president lives out his term. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? You want him to do the right thing. You want him to be healthy, do his job, finish his term, retire, have a great life, have his library. But people are human. As a doctor for the last 44 years, people get sick. They have illness. They have decline. They can die suddenly. What happens when you're the doctor and your patient, that happens to them, and you struggle with your job, but yet something is not healthy with your patient, and at what point, knowing your patient's responsibility, you have an obligation to speak up. So that topic isn't new. That topic has been discussed many, many times. I invite my journalist friends to do some writing, but they don't have time. They're busy. They're posting and blogging. But when I was there under President Clinton, a book that really helped me, guide me, and I actually told my successors, Dr. Richard Tuck, and his group, that the book that really helped was a book called Managing Crisis, Presidential Disability, and the 25th Amendment. It's on, I have a to-do list, a read list to that. There's another book that I don't have a copy here, is When Illness Strikes the Leader. It's what do you do about the dilemma of the captive king. And it really comes from what happened in England with the last monarch, about what happens with a captive king who is disabled. And, it's what do you do with that dilemma? So we're dealing here in modern history with the dilemma of a patient, the first patient, who most likely, because I never examined that patient, had a medical issue, medical decline in front of the whole world, and then you want his doctor to speak up. And so there'll be an interesting time about that. I don't know. I don't know Dr. O'Connor. I did try to reach out to him several years ago when President Biden was inaugurated. At that time, my book, The White House Doctor, had been optioned to Hollywood. And my screenwriter, Bill Harper, who did Grey's Anatomy, was preparing the script for the pilot for the TV series, which never got launched. That got put away somewhere. And what happened was Bill Harper said, hey, I'd like to see where your old office used to be. And I said, well, you can't just march into the grounds of the White House. You need to be cleared by somebody, and you have to ask permission from the physician and the president, because that office is on the ground floor of the residence of the White House. So let me reach out to Dr. O'Connor. I don't know him. I know his predecessors. I know Dr. Richard Tubb. I know the other doctors after him. I know Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who was the boss of Kevin O'Connor, and then Kevin O'Connor became the head. But let me reach out, and actually from Dr. Sean Conley, who was Trump's doctor, the last doctor at the end, I asked Sean, do you have Kevin's information? Because I want to reach out and ask permission. So I left a voice message for Dr. O'Connor with his office at GW Hospital, and I actually sent him an email. And I have copies of that email. And I said, Kevin, you probably don't know me. We've never met. Congratulations on your new job. It's an awesome position. I want to start off by saying that I thought we have an unwritten rule among former White House doctors that we never criticize each other openly. If we have an issue with each other or complain about each other, you take it behind the camera, back somewhere else. You don't do it in front of the media, because it adds and fuels to that controversy that the media loves. But then it was there. I asked for a favor. I said, hey, any chance when you're away from the residence or the POTUS is away, could I get a tour of my old office? I will not take pictures of it. The screenwriter wants to look. Never heard back. So I just let it go. Just let it go. Not meant to be. So I don't know him. I don't envy him. I can understand certain things about it. It's not my position to comment. I've never examined the president, President Biden. I did meet him a long time ago under the Clinton administration in passing, but I really don't know details about it. It's all hearsay. And in the end, the only advice I would give Dr. Conner and actually other White House doctors is one thing: never perjure yourself. It's not worth it, because eventually secrets get leaked. Eventually, somebody will write a tell-all book just like that. You can only hide things for so long, and history will bear it out. And once history bears it out, your reputation as a physician, as a former military officer, is toast. It's not worth it. So I'm going to pause for a brief break before I go to our authority on presidential care, Dr. Ludwig Deppisch, who's here in studio. He is the voice of reason, the voice of scholarly practice. He has done extensive research on the patterns and the behaviors of presidents and their doctors and what happens in dilemmas. And history tends to repeat itself. So what did we learn about history, and how can it apply to now in what we're dealing with? So stay tuned on House Calls with Dr. Connie and Dr. Ludwig Deppisch for more about Is There a Doctor in the House? Welcome to House Calls for our June show about dads and grads and doing what's the right thing. And really the name of this show is There a Doctor in the House? And it talks about the latest news about the White House doctor, about President Biden's doctor and his relationship with the first patient, President Biden, and the book that Jake Tapper had written, The Tell-All, as well as other books that are coming out. But I'm also going to promote the book that my guest wrote. He's written many books about the history of White House doctors. He came out with the second edition of the White House Physician, a history from George Washington to Joe Biden about White House doctors. It is a well-researched piece of work, scholarly work. Look at all the footnotes, right? This isn't something where you just sort of figure out on your own, I'm just going to go by hearsay. He totally researched this, researched completely. This is the second edition. This is the first edition. So welcome, Dr. Ludwig Deppisch. He's our special guest. Let me talk about Dr. Lud. He's a native of New York City and was educated at Fordham University for his bachelor's and the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, MD, both outstanding schools. Dr. Deppisch is board certified in both anatomic and clinical pathology. He served on the teaching faculty of 3 medical schools. He's an emeritus professor of pathology at the Northeast Ohio Medical University from Rootstown, Ohio. He retired in Arizona. He has a master's degree in American history from the University of Arizona. He has published 4 books that deal with the health of American presidents, the physicians who treated them. I am so honored. You were actually my guest on House Calls in March 21, 2019, when we talked about longevity and now having a life purpose as a key to long life. So you're an example of that. How did we meet? Remind me how we met.
When I was researching my first book, I was up for a master's degree in history at the American history at the U of A in Tucson, and I wrote you. It was my 65th birthday, I think.
You sent me an email?
I sent you an email, and you responded. I needed some background for my thesis, which was the White House Physician, and its effect upon domestic and foreign policy. And you kindly responded. And you were then at the Mayo Clinic, and we met at a delicatessen. And it was wonderful, and we've been friends ever since. You've always answered my questions, and you have been very supportive of my interest in this issue, which is relevant and topical right now. So that's how we met.
Well, I'm very touched that I'm really inspired. You've written some beautiful work, and media is such nowadays, they don't have time to read books. They don't have time. And they'll go interview people, but if you really want to study it, you look at the history, a lot of this. You know, you've studied White House doctors that care of the president. So in light of your background, what do you think about all the things going on recently?
Well, there were a number of occasions in the past history of medical physicians to the president in which not the whole facts have come out. And I'll give you a few. Grover Cleveland, whose physician, Dr. George Bryant, removed a malignancy of his upper maxilla. And it was done on a yacht in the middle of the East River. No nurses, 6 physicians, 5 physicians and 1 dentist who did it. And Grover Cleveland vacationed at his summer home, which was in Connecticut on Long Island Sound. And his physician said was nothing more than a toothache.
Yeah.
And it was many years later when it came out. I don't think anything too significant happened because he was ill, but was covered up. The most interesting, perhaps most iconic situation was Woodrow Wilson, who suffered a disabling stroke in August of 1919 on a train in Pueblo, Colorado. He was trying to promote the League of Nations, which is a key component of the Treaty of Versailles, and it was the forerunner, a precursor of the United Nations, the League of Nations. And the Republicans were no friends of a Democratic president, Woodrow Wilson, and they had a lot of objections to it. Wilson suffered a major stroke getting back from this train ride. It went all the way to the West Coast and was getting out and to speak to citizens to rise public opinion in favor of the League of Nations against those hateful Republicans. Well, he was disabled. He was unconscious for a while. His left side of his body was paralyzed.
They had a right-sided stroke.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, middle cerebral artery. And he wouldn't see any members of his staff except
Edith.
Mrs. Wilson, his second marriage, Edith Wilson, his doctor,
Introduce them.
Dr. Grayson, Carrie Grayson. Interesting, Carrie Grayson was the one responsible for introducing Woodrow Wilson to his second wife.
The matchmaker.
He was a matchmaker. Through Carrie Grayson's fiancée, Alice Gertrude, called Altrude, who was Edith Bowling Galt's friend and travel companion. So they were very close. But for 6 months, Wilson did not see his cabinet. He had a cabinet meeting, I think, in March of 2020. In the meantime, Edith, with the doctor, and Joe Tumulty from New Jersey, political supporter and political fixer. They ran the government. He would not allow materials to come to him directly. They had to go through the triumvirate, especially Edith, and she would decide what to pass on and what to pass on.
Before the days of the autopen.
Before the days of the autopen.
And media.
And media.
No live television.
There was no significant media questioning of this. So things went awry. In addition to his physical disabilities, he had emotional and mental disability. He was unconscious for a while, and when he got back to verbalizing with people, he became very, very hostile and very angry and had no great consideration of his opponents. So when there were attempts to monitor, to amend the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Paris, which ended World War I, had the League of Nations as a major component of it. And that was Wilson's dream. He wanted the League of Nations, so he'd be the peacemaker. But he refused to compromise at all. Despite many people, especially the Republicans, Senator Cabot Lodge, who was
Henry Cabot Lodge.
he was the one who was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Wilson refused to be with that.
With these things, how did they come out, though? Did somebody write a book? Did someone finally? Because those are in the days there was no 25th Amendment, because that was until the 1960s, in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. Like, who's in charge? So the vice president was there, but there was no
Vice President Hobart, I think was his name. He wanted nothing to do with this. He wanted, he from Indiana, I think, and he wanted to shrink back to Indiana and not get involved in this controversy.
Human behavior. But who's flying the plane? Who's leading the country?
Well,
messages are being passed.
Well, he was stuck in the White House, mainly his bedroom, for 6 months. And there were other things that went on during that period of time for which he could not react. There was trouble with Mexico. Pancho Villa was
so
attacking.
You wrote a book about first ladies and their health. And from what you've read about first ladies, and I don't know Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden, when you look at what happened recently, the power, what lessons do you learn about the first lady, her role in the president's health?
Her role is to protect the president physically, psychologically, emotionally. And that's what she did. And Kerry Grayson had the same role. Wilson always had a neurotic streak. When the first Mrs. Wilson, Ellen, was dying in the White House from kidney failure, Dr. Grayson refused to warn the president until she was terminal. So he wouldn't get upset and he wouldn't have a neurotic reaction.
It's the drama. So, from what I've known, having served 3 first ladies, the true power in a lot of ways is the first lady, even
Right.
though unelected official.
Right.
Because somebody likened it, it's the first voice he hears every morning, and it's the last voice he hears every night. And it truly is, the first lady is the protector. I know him better than anybody. I can talk to him frankly. And as White House doctor, you can't be physician to the president unless the first lady likes you. If the first lady doesn't trust you, forget it. You have no chance. But the first lady likes you. So a special bond between the first lady, the president. And so it's interesting because people are people. Your patients, you know them, you care about them, you're there all the time.
Nancy Reagan didn't like the first 2 of the 3 presidential physicians, Dan Ruge and another fellow, because she didn't trust him. She didn't get along with him. It was only the 3rd White House physician or presidential physician, Army Colonel Surgeon John Hutton, whom she bonded with.
John. Yeah.
And he continued to check in with the president for the rest of his life after he retired from the military.
I got to meet Dr. Hutton. Yeah, he was very loyal. So looking at history, and I know, we're in the land of sound bites because most people will not sit and read an article.
Right.
And we get messages from, the public, give me a sound bite. That's what they like. What does history teach you about White House doctors and their patients?
It teaches me a couple things. First of all, that when the president becomes president, is inaugurated, he should not choose the doctor that he's known for many, many years, because that doctor becomes very attached to him. The president's success mirrors the doctor's success. So the doctor is invested in the president's success. In the case of Dr. O'Connor, he was the vice presidential physician during all the 2 terms of Barack Obama. He retired from the military at the time. He was a colonel in the
Army.
in the U.S. Army. And then he went to George Washington School of Medicine, run their executive medicine program for 4 years. Meanwhile, he was a family doctor to the Bidens. And then when Joe Biden was elected president, well, he selected someone he knew and trusted, and someone who was very loyal to him, Dr. O'Connor. And O'Connor considered himself a member of the family, and everyone in the White House and previous physicians said he was considered a member of the family, was very close to the Bidens. And I've spoken to Dr. O'Connor, and that conviviality, familiarity, loyalty came out. By the way, I spoke to Dr. O'Connor twice, and he's an excellent physician, and he was very pleasant with me. In fact, he even invited me to the White House to see his office. The election interview.
Did you ever ask him about his patient's health?
No, I
never went there.
I thought that was confidential information. That was Dr. O'Connor. And also, I think that Dr. O'Connor would have profited by having some of his opinions measured by people who weren't loyalists to the president. Dr. O'Connor never met the press during the 4 years. You met the press. Ronnie Jackson met the press.
Richard Tubb met the press.
Dick Tubb met the press. He didn't. All his, he examined the president 3 times. While president. He never did a cognitive exam.
He said that, or you can tell by the records?
It's not listed in any records. I never asked him that, but I've had copies of the records that were produced at the end of these examinations, which were very thorough, but there was no cognitive exam listed.
And yet there was a neurologist who reportedly visited the White House several times.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
But
I don't either.
These issues never were put to Dr. O'Connor directly by the Washington press, which, of course, can be very nasty. And some presidential physicians have discovered that, but they can be very nasty. So he never was criticized in the open. And eventually, towards the end of the 4 years, or in the 3rd year, Fox News tried to get interviews with Dr. O'Connor, but they could never reach him. I think Dr. O'Connor didn't want to, he didn't want to say anything that might have been disloyal to the president or anything that might have been medically secretive or confidential to the president. He didn't want to be blabbed all over, Fox News.
But, it is such a polarized time. And obviously, I always say you have to rise above how we're divided and how just doing the right thing. I tell patients I've taken care of Democrats and Republicans alike, and they're all the same in terms of patients. You just treat them like any other patient you have. But it is hard when you're actually there because you care about your patient, you care about that. But you also care about your job. And if there's a situation, I tell young doctors that a patient will tell you, don't tell so-and-so, it's not good. It puts you in a very tough position, especially if you know potentially that can be a problem down the line. And if somebody asks you, well, I don't want you to tell anybody about this, don't leak it out, is the patient not in denial about that? They fear that it's going to be revealed, they're going to lose their job. But you have an obligation to convince them that it honestly is your interest, but in terms of your position, I need to say something or do something. Obviously, number one, do the best you can in terms of your patient's health, optimize it, call in the right specialist. The question that was posed to me when I did a workshop on presidential disability at Fordham Law School over 20-some years ago, because they talked about the 25th Amendment at length. And they asked me, what if you were sitting there, back in the days when you were President Clinton's doctor, somebody had, your patients had come to you, your patient came to you and said, I know about this diagnosis, I don't think it's going to play well in the media, I don't want you to tell anybody about this. Would you do it? And I said, I would explain to them if it impacted his ability to do his job, then I'm obligated to say something. I'm obligated to make sure you got good help, specialist care, and also tell the First Lady about this, the Chief of Staff, that we really need to get you help. But I also need to say something in terms of the 25th Amendment, in terms of a disability that can impact your ability to do your job. And then the question is posed is, what if they say you need to cover up? And if you have no choice and they force you to cover up, you have only one option, and that is to resign. You resign, and you resign loudly. Because when you resign, then that gets everybody's attention really fast. Because when they ask you to cover up the truth, it violates your code as a physician, as a professional, as a military officer, and your obligations to the country, because potentially there could be harm in terms of the decisions that your patient makes. And we have a long history of that. The stroke by Woodrow Wilson, the cardiomyopathy of President Roosevelt, Addison's disease by President Kennedy, on and on. But I think, I think as a physician and somebody who sat in that seat, sat in the office, you are obligated. You are obviously the personal physician to your patient, but you also have an obligation to the American public. No matter what your political leanings are, it rises above it that you have an obligation to tell the truth. And that's all.
Very difficult.
It is very hard.
Very
because
difficult
you're human.
because most of the physicians to the president have been military people. Mm-hmm. And who is the commander-in-chief?
He's your commander-in-chief.
Is the president. You can lose your job.
Mm-hmm. Fired, court-martialed.
You can reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And it could be terrible. Physicians to the president, if they're in good standing, can write books after they retire
And they can.
do other things. And they do that. Can't write a book, if that's the case. And if you're a friend of the president,
You've lost it.
if you're a friend of the president, and if the physician becomes too friendly with the president, member of the family,
It's a tough thing. It's a dilemma.
And because you don't want to be disloyal.
So you've got your loyalty, but you've got your obligation. And my hope and prayer does the right thing, because eventually all things leak. You wouldn't have all this history if somebody didn't leak.
Well,
and then you go down as history as somebody who covered up.
Jack Tapper couldn't have written a book.
He should have reported it, but books sell. But we're gonna. I can't believe the show's almost over. It's over. So we're gonna wrap it up, and we'll see how the testimony goes, what the press is willing to share. And for all future White House doctors out there, don't perjure yourself. Tell the truth. Do the right thing. So thanks, Dr. Deppisch, for being on our show. If any media reach out to me, can I ask them to reach out to you? We'll give them your email address. I won't give them your cell phone number. Give me your email address.
Well, sure, my email address. We've corresponded once or twice over the last 20 years.
Well, thanks for being on our show.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right. All the
Bye-bye.
best. Take care. Well, that's it for House Calls with Dr. Connie Mariano and Dr. Deppisch. Y'all have a good month of June, and we wish you all the best.